Snow fell thick across the silent town of Fairbanks, Alaska, cloaking the streets, rooftops, and pine trees in heavy white silence. The cold was the kind that cut straight through coats, gloves, and skin, sharp enough to make even the toughest men clench their teeth. But for John Miller, the 40-year-old man trudging up a frozen driveway with his breath rising in pale clouds, the cold outside was nothing compared to the storm inside him. For most of his adult life, John had lived in shadows of his own making. He was the kind of man people described as dependable but distant, always showing up for work, never showing up for drinks. He worked seasonal construction jobs, sometimes odd mechanical repairs, but never stuck long enough anywhere to form real friendships. He carried himself with the weight of failure, a marriage that ended badly, a reputation for having a temper, and a loneliness that grew sharper each year. That loneliness is what pushed him online late at night, scrolling through dating apps and chat rooms, searching for someone who might understand him. That's where he met Marissa James. Marissa had a way of writing that cut through John's guardedness. Her messages weren't filled with shallow flattery. She wrote like someone who had been through storms of her own, warm, empathetic, and a little weary. "We've both lived enough to know how cold the world can get," she once typed. "Maybe we can keep each other warm." Those words lodged in John's chest. He started waking up looking for her messages, checking his phone like a teenager. Their conversations stretched into the night, about family they'd lost, dreams they still held on to, and the ache of being misunderstood. For the first time in years, John felt seen. By December, Marissa had invited him to visit her home just outside of town. She lived in a small log cabin surrounded by silent woods. She promised a warm fire, a hot meal, and company to ease the endless Alaskan winter nights. John said yes without hesitation. He convinced himself it wasn't just curiosity, it was fate. As he turned up the driveway now, boots crunching on snow, he felt his pulse quicken. Through the frosted window of the cabin, he saw the faint glow of amber light flickering and shadows moving from the hearth. He tightened his grip on the small overnight bag he carried. The door opened before he could knock. Marissa stood there, framed by the glow of firelight. She was smaller than he expected, her frame delicate but her presence steady. Her dark hair spilled over her shoulders, and her smile seemed to warm the freezing air. "You made it," she said, her voice carrying both relief and joy. John nodded, suddenly awkward, the words catching in his throat. "Yeah, I wasn't going to let a little snow stop me." She laughed softly, stepping aside. "Come in. You must be freezing." The cabin smelled of cedarwood and roasted herbs. A fire popped in the stone fireplace, casting orange light against the wooden walls. On the table sat 2 plates already set, steam rising from bowls of stew. John shrugged off his coat, feeling the heat sink into his bones. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking at her. This woman who had been only words and images on a screen for months, now flesh and breath before him. "It feels different," he admitted quietly. "How so?" Marissa asked, tilting her head. "Like I've been waiting to walk into this room for a long time," he said. Her eyes softened. "Then maybe you were meant to." Dinner passed with laughter that surprised even John. He wasn't used to smiling, much less laughing, but Marissa drew it out of him like it was the most natural thing in the world. She told him about growing up in Anchorage, about long summers where the sun barely set, about winters where she learned to find beauty in silence. He shared stories of fixing up cars with his father, the night he drove away from his marriage with nothing but a duffel bag, and the regret that followed him like a ghost. There was no judgment in her gaze, only understanding. For John, it was intoxicating. This feeling that someone could look at him, broken pieces and all, and not turn away. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them both like a fragile promise. As the night stretched on, John found himself daring to imagine something he hadn't in years, a future. Not just more days blurred into survival, but nights like this, filled with light, laughter, and a woman who might finally be the answer to his long search for belonging. But fate, as it often does, had a crueler plan. The hours drifted by in that small cabin, the snow outside falling heavier, muting the world into silence. Inside, John Miller felt something he hadn't in years: safe. He leaned back in his chair, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth as he watched Marissa move gracefully across the room, collecting dishes from their dinner. The way she hummed under her breath, a quiet melody that rose and fell with the fire's crackle, left him almost entranced. "You cook like my mother used to," John said, his voice low. "Haven't had a meal like that in, God, I don't even know how long." Marissa glanced at him, her lips curving into a smile tinged with sadness. "Then I'm glad I could bring you a piece of that back." It wasn't just the food, or the fire, or the way the wine loosened his tongue. It was her. She had this way of listening, really listening, as though every word mattered. For a man who had spent most of his life being misunderstood, that was intoxicating. But beneath that warmth, Marissa carried a tension she couldn't quite hide. Every time her gaze lingered too long on him, every time she bit her lip before speaking, it was as if a battle was waging behind her eyes. After dinner, they moved to the couch, sitting closer now, the firelight painting their faces in amber and shadow. John's hand brushed against hers, tentative at first, but when she didn't pull away, his fingers laced through hers. "I could get used to this," John said, almost to himself. Marissa studied him, her eyes searching his. "John, before this goes any further, there's something I need to tell you." The words hit him like a stone dropped in still water, ripples of unease spreading across his chest. He frowned slightly, squeezing her hand. "What do you mean?" She inhaled deeply, her breath shaky. "I've been afraid of this moment. Afraid that if I told you, I'd lose you. But I can't build something real with you while hiding it." John leaned forward, brows furrowed. "Marissa, you're scaring me. Just say it." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "John, I wasn't born the way I am now. I'm transgender." The room seemed to tilt. The fire popped, sending sparks upward, but John barely heard it. His chest tightened, the blood rushing to his ears. "You what?" His voice cracked like ice under pressure. Marissa's voice softened, pleading. "I've lived as a woman for most of my life. This is who I am. I didn't want to hide from you, but I didn't know how to tell you without losing you." For a long moment, John just stared at her, his hand slipping from hers. Every word replayed in his head, colliding with the months of messages, the hours of laughter, the intimacy that had seemed so real. To him, it suddenly felt like the floor beneath his feet had been yanked away. "You mean to tell me?" He stood abruptly, pacing across the small room. "All this time you knew? And you didn't say a damn word?" Marissa rose too, tears spilling now. "John, I wasn't trying to deceive you. I was trying to protect myself. People don't always react with kindness. I was waiting until I felt safe enough with you." "Safe enough?" His laugh was hollow, bitter. "You let me fall for you. Let me believe this was real. And now you drop this on me? Do you know what that makes me look like?" Her voice broke. "This isn't about appearances, John. It's about love. I love you. I wanted to share my truth because I trust you." But John's face twisted with anger, shame, and something darker. His past failures, his bruised pride, the years of feeling emasculated, they all surged to the surface like gasoline meeting flame. "You think this is love?" he spat. "This is betrayal. You made a fool out of me." Marissa shook her head, desperate. "No. I gave you my heart, John. Please, don't let this destroy what we have. You know me. You know my soul. That hasn't changed." But in John's mind, everything had changed. The walls seemed to close in, the warmth of the cabin turning suffocating. His breath came fast, uneven, his hands clenching into fists. "You should have told me from the start," he growled. "And you would have walked away," she whispered. "Damn right I would have." The silence that followed was deafening. Only the wind outside pressed against the cabin walls, a ghostly wail. Marissa stepped closer, reaching for him, her eyes wide with fear and hope all tangled together. "John, please. I'm still me. Don't let this be the end." But something in him had already snapped. Her touch, once comforting, now felt like fire on his skin. The shame, the humiliation, the sense that his manhood had been mocked, it all coiled into rage he couldn't control. He shoved her back, his voice raw. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie," she screamed through tears. "I just wanted to be loved." The firelight flickered wildly across their faces, painting them as two figures locked in a battle neither could win. John's chest heaved, his vision tunneling as if the world had narrowed to just this moment, this woman, this truth he couldn't bear. He could hear his own pulse in his ears, pounding, drowning out reason. And as his fury boiled over, The night that had begun with laughter and warmth twisted into something irreversible, something that would leave the cabin in silence far colder than the snow outside. The air inside the cabin grew heavy, thick with unspoken violence. The warmth of the fire no longer felt inviting. It flickered across the wooden walls like a warning, shadows stretching long and jagged. John's chest rose and fell in harsh rhythm, his fists clenched at his sides. Across from him, Marissa trembled but held her ground, her tear-streaked face a mixture of fear and desperate courage. "John," she whispered, her voice cracking, "please sit down. Please, just breathe." But breathing felt impossible. His thoughts spiraled, fast and merciless. The years of being laughed at behind his back, the whispers that he wasn't man enough to hold on to his ex-wife, the gnawing suspicion that he was always destined to be the fool. Now, standing in front of Marissa, all those insecurities clawed their way up like demons. "You think you can just trick me into this?" His voice thundered, raw and ragged. "You let me walk into this house, into your life, believing I knew who you were. And now you expect me to just what? Smile and say it's fine." Marissa's voice rose in urgency. "I never tricked you. I gave you my heart. Everything I shared with you was real. The laughter, the late-night talks, the dreams we built together, none of that was fake." But her words only fueled his rage. To him, they sounded like excuses, not truths. His pride, his identity, the fragile sense of control he clung to, Marissa's revelation had shattered all of it. He stepped forward, his shadow towering over her in the firelight. "Real? You call this real? You're not even the woman you claim to be." Her breath hitched, and tears blurred her vision, but she didn't back away. "I am a woman, John. I've lived my life fighting to be seen for who I am. And I thought you were different. I thought you would love me for me." For a fleeting moment, something in her eyes, pure, pleading, human, nearly cracked the wall of fury around him. But then the shame surged again, hotter, crueler, twisting into something darker. He shoved her back hard. She stumbled against the couch, catching herself, gasping. "Don't touch me," he roared, though she hadn't even raised her hands. His voice echoed through the cabin, colliding with the shrill whistle of the wind outside. Marissa's sobs filled the space, desperate and raw. "You don't understand. I've lost everything before, people who couldn't accept me. Don't be like them, John. Please, don't let hate take you from me too." Her words, fragile as they were, should have softened him. But in John's mind, they landed as accusations, proof that she had always known her truth would destroy him. His shame twisted into venom. "You made me into a joke," he spat, his face inches from hers now. "Do you know what people will say if they find out? Do you know what this makes me?" Marissa's voice broke. "It makes you a man who was loved. That's all. That's enough." But those words, meant to heal, only deepened the wound. His vision blurred with red. His breath came ragged, animalistic. He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her violently. "Stop lying. Stop pretending." She cried out, struggling against his grip. "John, please, you're hurting me." But he didn't let go. The years of anger, of rejection, of feeling small, they all erupted in that single, irreversible moment. His hands tightened, his fury unchecked. Marissa gasped, her body writhing as she tried to break free. "John," she screamed, her voice echoing off the wooden beams. "Please." Then came silence, sudden, horrifying silence. The fire crackled on, indifferent. Outside, the storm swallowed the cabin in white. Inside, Marissa crumpled to the floor, her eyes wide, her lips parted as if she had one last word to give but couldn't. Her stillness hit him like a gunshot. For a moment, John just stood there, his chest heaving, staring down at her motionless body. His hands shook violently, his mind scrambling to process what he had done. "No, no, no, no." His voice broke into panicked gasps. He knelt beside her, shaking her arm. "Marissa, wake up. I didn't mean, God, I didn't mean." But she didn't move. The warmth of her skin was already fading, her gaze fixed on the ceiling beams above, as if searching for a heaven that might forgive her. John collapsed beside her, pressing his palms to his temples, his breath shallow and uneven. The cabin suddenly felt like a coffin, its walls closing in, its silence screaming louder than any words. The man who had walked in hoping for love had become something else entirely. A killer. And as the storm raged outside, the truth settled over him heavier than any snow. There was no undoing what had just been done. The storm raged through the night, burying the cabin deeper under a blanket of white. By dawn, the silence outside was almost holy, broken only by the groan of trees bowing under heavy snow. Inside the cabin, however, silence carried a different weight, thick, suffocating, and stained with death. Marissa's body lay still on the rug before the fireplace, her dark hair spread like a halo against the wood floor. The flames had burned low, casting only a faint glow on the tragedy that had unfolded hours before. John hadn't slept. He sat hunched in the corner, eyes hollow, his hands still trembling as if the rage that had consumed him hadn't fully left. His mind replayed everything, her voice, her tears, the way her body went limp. He wanted to believe it was a nightmare, but the lifeless figure on the floor refused to let him. By mid-morning, a neighbor trudged up the driveway. Old Mrs. Keating lived a quarter-mile down, a sharp-eyed widow who checked on everyone when storms hit. She noticed John's truck still parked in the drive, half buried in snow. That was unusual. She rapped on the door. No answer. Another knock. Still nothing. Finally, she pushed it open and stepped inside. What she saw froze her blood. Oh Lord! Her hand flew to her mouth as her eyes landed on Marissa. The body, the bruises, the stillness. She turned and saw John in the corner, pale and dazed. John, what happened here? He didn't answer, just stared, lips trembling, eyes red from sleepless hours. Mrs. Keating backed out quickly, her boots crunching in the snow as she rushed home to call the police. Within the hour, flashing lights cut through the storm. The small cabin, once hidden by forest and snow, became the center of chaos. Detective Clara Hayes stepped out of her cruiser, her breath forming tight clouds in the bitter air. She was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed and deliberate, the kind of woman who carried authority without raising her voice. She pulled her coat tighter and made her way inside. The scene struck her immediately, the extinguished fire, the dishes still on the table, and Marissa's body lying where she fell. Clara crouched beside her, taking in the details, bruising around the neck, broken skin on her arm, tears still streaking her cheeks. Time of death? She asked the coroner quietly. Likely sometime after midnight, he replied. Clara rose slowly, scanning the room. It wasn't just a killing. It was intimate, personal. Rage mixed with betrayal. She could feel it in the air. Clara lingered by the fireplace a little longer than the deputies expected, her sharp eyes taking in the smallest details. Every overturned chair, every shadow of struggle etched into the wood. She had stood in rooms like this before, but each time carried its own weight. And this one pressed heavy against her chest. She thought back to her early years on the force, when she was still proving herself in a department full of men who doubted she belonged. She remembered the first homicide case she ever caught, a young woman beaten to death by her boyfriend. Clara could still see the victim's shoes lying by the door, as if she had been about to run but never made it. That case had ignited something in her, a promise she carried through every investigation since. She would never look away from the violence that hid behind closed doors. As she looked down at Marissa, that promise burned in her again. Clara didn't see a case. She saw a woman who had dared to hope, who had set the table for two, who had let someone into her home and into her heart. And now, all that remained was silence and broken trust. One of the younger officers cleared his throat nearby. "Detective, do you want us to bag the dishes too?" Clara snapped out of her thoughts. "Yes. Everything stays as it is until forensics is done. No shortcuts." Her tone was steady, but her heart felt anything but. She straightened and stepped outside for a moment, the bitter air biting at her face. Across the yard, neighbors had gathered, their faces pale, whispers carrying on the wind. Clara caught fragments. She was such a sweet woman. Never hurt a soul. How could this happen here? She lit a cigarette, though she had promised herself years ago she'd quit. The smoke curled upward, disappearing into the gray sky. For a moment, she let herself feel the grief she usually kept locked away. A deputy approached cautiously. "Detective Hayes, you okay?" Clara exhaled slowly, watching the smoke fade. "I'll be fine," she said. Then, almost to herself, "It's Marissa I'm worried about, making sure she doesn't get lost in the story of the man who killed her." The deputy frowned, not quite understanding, But Clara didn't explain further. She didn't need to. She knew how the headlines would read, how the town would talk. John Miller, the man who snapped. But Clara was determined that Marissa's name wouldn't vanish under his shadow. When she stepped back inside, her gaze settled on Marissa once more. I'll fight for you, she thought. I'll make them remember who you were, not just how you died. That silent vow hardened inside her like steel. From that moment on, Clara wasn't just solving a crime. She was carrying Marissa's voice into a courtroom that might otherwise forget it. Turning, she spotted John still sitting in the corner, guarded now by 2 deputies. His clothes were wrinkled, his face blotched, his hands trembling. He looked less like a monster than a man broken by his own fury. But Clara had seen enough to know. Those 2 versions often lived in the same body. She approached him, her voice calm but firm. John Miller. He blinked, sluggish, like her words took a moment to register. Yeah, I'm Detective Hayes. I need you to tell me what happened here. His lips parted, but only silence came. His gaze flicked to Marissa's body, then away, as if the sight burned him. You were with her last night. Clara pressed. He swallowed hard. Yes. And now she's dead. John's shoulders collapsed under the weight of those words. His head fell into his hands. I didn't mean to. Clara studied him for a long beat. She'd heard that line before, countless times from men who claimed love but left bruises behind. Yet something in his broken tone told her the story wasn't simple. Deputies, she said finally, her voice clipped. Take him in. As they led John out into the snow, neighbors gathered at the edge of the property, their faces pale with shock. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Marissa was beloved here, the kind woman who shoveled walks for the elderly, who cooked soup for those sick in the winter. To them, she was kindness embodied. And now, she was gone. Clara remained inside, her eyes falling back on the still figure by the fireplace. She crouched down once more, speaking softly as if Marissa could still hear her. I'll find out what really happened, she whispered. You deserve at least that. Outside, the storm began to clear, but in Fairbanks, Alaska, a darker storm had just begun. The Fairbanks Police Department wasn't a sprawling urban fortress. It was a squat brick building with narrow hallways and stale coffee always brewing in the corner. But for John Miller, led inside with his hands cuffed behind his back, it felt like the gates of hell. Detective Clara Hayes followed close behind, her eyes never leaving him. She'd seen this posture before, the sagging shoulders, the blank stare. A man already drowning in guilt, but still clinging to the hope that someone might believe his version of the truth. They brought him into a gray-walled interrogation room. A single table sat under harsh fluorescent light. A recorder clicked on with a metallic snap. John lowered himself into the chair, chains clinking as his cuffed wrists met the table. Clara sat across from him, folding her hands calmly. Let's start simple, she said. Tell me about last night. For a moment, silence. John stared at the scratches on the table's surface, his throat working like the words were caught there. Finally, he muttered, We had dinner. We talked. She was happy. And then, Clara pressed gently. His jaw tightened. Then she told me something. Something I wasn't prepared for. Clara leaned in. She told you she was transgender. His eyes shot up, startled. How do you? We found her journals, Clara said evenly. She wasn't hiding who she was from the world, John. Just protecting herself from people who couldn't handle the truth. He looked away, shame flushing across his face. I didn't mean to hurt her, he whispered. Clara let the silence stretch, the weight of his words filling the room. Then she asked, So why did you? John slammed his fists on the table, chains rattling. Because she lied to me. His voice cracked, the raw anger still burning beneath the guilt. She made me believe. She let me believe. She was someone she wasn't. Do you know what that does to a man? Clara didn't flinch. She'd faced worse storms across that table. Her voice stayed calm, even cool. What it does to a man doesn't matter as much as what you did to her. She's dead, John. And that wasn't her choice. It was yours. His breathing grew ragged, his face glistening with sweat. He pressed his palms against his eyes, rocking slightly in the chair. I snapped. 1 second she was talking, and the next, his voice trailed off, strangled by the memory. Clara let him sit in it, the silence pressing in until his shoulders slumped lower. She scribbled a note, then asked, What did you feel when she told you? Before it turned to anger. John blinked at her, confused. What? You felt something, Clara said. Shock, maybe. Fear. Or was it humiliation? Be honest, John. Because if you can't face the truth of what you felt, you'll never face what you did. He stared at the wall, his lips trembling. I felt small, he admitted finally. Like I was the butt of some cruel joke. Like everyone was laughing at me, and I didn't even know it. I felt like less of a man. Clara leaned back, her gaze sharp. So you decided to prove you were a man by taking her life? His face twisted, torn between fury and despair. I didn't decide. I lost control. The recorder on the table caught every word, every crack in his voice. Clara knew a jury wouldn't hear a man who lost control. They'd hear a man who chose rage over compassion, violence over love. She closed her notebook. We're done for now. As deputies led him away, Clara remained seated, staring at the empty chair across from her. She'd heard his confession, even if he hadn't realized it. The case was building itself, piece by piece. But something gnawed at her. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a mirror held up to the uglier truths of the world she lived in. Truths about fear, prejudice, and what happens when secrets collide with fragile pride. Later that night, Clara visited Marissa's cabin again. The snow had stopped, leaving the world eerily still. Inside, the warmth was gone. Only the outline of events remained. 2 plates on the table, a wine bottle half empty, the ashes of a fire that had once lit up laughter and love. She crouched near the rug where Marissa had fallen. The deputies had taken the body, but the air still carried the weight of her presence. Clara whispered softly, almost like a prayer. You deserve better. I'll make sure they know that. The wind moaned against the cabin walls, as if the woods themselves were grieving. Back at the station, John sat alone in his cell, the echoes of his rage and guilt swirling like a storm he couldn't escape. He pressed his hands together, whispering something no one could quite hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse, maybe both. And as the town of Fairbanks began to buzz with whispers of the tragedy, one thing was certain. The story of John Miller and Marissa James was no longer just theirs. It had become a cautionary tale, one that would soon play out under the cold scrutiny of a courtroom. The courthouse in downtown Fairbanks was nothing grand, just a sturdy brick building with wooden benches worn smooth by decades of trials. But on the morning of John Miller's hearing, it felt like the eyes of the whole town were on it. The murder of Marissa James had struck a nerve. People filed in, whispering about the quiet woman who had always been so kind and the man who had turned her home into a crime scene. Snow dusted the shoulders of coats, boots stomped to shake off the cold, and beneath it all was a sense that this trial wasn't only about John. It was about justice for Marissa. John sat at the defense table in a wrinkled suit borrowed from the jail's donation closet. He looked thinner, hollow-eyed, a man drained by the weight of what he had done. His hands fidgeted constantly, twisting a tissue until it tore into shreds. The defense attorney, a weary public defender named Alan Trent, leaned toward him, murmuring reminders. Stay calm. Don't react. Let me speak for you. But John barely seemed to hear. Across the aisle, the prosecution prepared with quiet confidence. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Morgan, sharp and relentless, stacked her files with precision. She had built her career on cases that tested the town's conscience, and she wasn't about to let this one slip through her fingers. To her, this was more than murder. It was about exposing what happens when hate and pride boil over into violence. The judge, stern and gray-haired, called the courtroom to order. The gavel struck once, echoing like thunder in the tense room. We are here for the trial of John Miller, charged with the murder of Marissa James. Rachel stood, facing the jury, her voice steady and resonant. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case of trust shattered and life stolen. Marissa James opened her heart to John Miller. She offered him kindness, love, and honesty. And when she revealed her truth, that she was a transgender woman, he chose not to accept her. He chose violence. He placed his pride above her life. At the end of this trial, you will see there is only one verdict that serves justice: guilty of murder. John shifted uncomfortably, his head lowered, but Rachel's eyes never left the jury. She wanted them to feel the weight of every word. Then Alan rose for the defense, his tone more subdued. This case is not as simple as the prosecution wants you to believe. My client, John Miller, is not a monster. He is a man who was confronted with a shocking revelation, one that overwhelmed him emotionally and psychologically. He did not plan to kill Marissa James. He reacted in the heat of the moment, in confusion and distress. You must decide whether this was truly murder or a tragic accident born out of a storm of emotions. The first witness was Detective Clara Hayes. She walked to the stand with calm authority, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. Rachel guided her through the events, the discovery of Marissa's body, John's dazed presence in the cabin, his words in the interrogation room. He admitted he snapped, Clara testified firmly. Those were his exact words. He said he lost control. Alan rose for cross-examination, attempting to soften the image. Detective Hayes, isn't it true that Mr. Miller appeared distraught? That he was weeping, saying he hadn't meant for it to happen? Yes, Clara conceded. But remorse after the fact does not erase intent in the moment. The words hung heavy. Alan sat down, knowing the jury had felt their sting. Next came the medical examiner, who described the bruising and cause of death. The details were clinical, but each word painted a brutal picture. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably, unable to look at the photographs projected onto the screen. Then Rachel called Mrs. Keating, the elderly neighbor who had discovered the scene. She clutched a tissue in her hand, her voice quivering as she described stepping into Marissa's home. She was so sweet, the woman said. She shoveled my walk every winter, even when she wasn't feeling well. And then I saw her there, on the floor, like that. Her sobs filled the room, and even the judge gave her a moment to compose herself. Rachel Morgan adjusted her glasses, letting the weight of Mrs. Keating's words hang in the air. The jury's eyes shimmered, some with tears, others with quiet rage. Then Rachel stepped forward, holding a slim notebook in her hands, its leather cover worn and edges frayed. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but softer than before. "With the court's permission, I'd like to submit a piece of evidence into the record, the personal journal of Marissa James, found in her cabin, beside her bed." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge nodded gravely. "Proceed." Rachel opened the journal carefully, as though it might crumble in her hands. She glanced at the jury, then began to read. December 14th. Tonight I set the table for two. I never thought I'd have someone to share stew with again in this lifetime. He makes me laugh, even when he doesn't try. I don't know if he sees it, but when he smiles, I forget how heavy the world can be. Rachel's voice caught slightly, but she pressed on. December 16th. I'm afraid of losing him if I tell the truth. But I can't keep hiding forever. He deserves honesty, and I deserve love without fear. God, please let him understand. Please let him see me as I am. A hush fell over the room. One juror covered her mouth, blinking rapidly to hold back tears. Even the judge shifted slightly in his chair. Rachel turned another page. This is the final entry, written just hours before she died. Her voice lowered, trembling now with the weight of the words. December 20th. He's on his way here. The snow is falling so heavy, but my heart feels light. I lit the fire, made his favorite stew, even set out the good wine. Tonight, I will tell him. Tonight, I will trust love more than fear. Maybe this time, the truth won't drive someone away. Rachel closed the journal gently. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, punctuated only by the muffled sobs of someone in the gallery. She looked directly at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, these are Marissa's words. Not mine. Not speculation. Her own voice, her own hope, her own love. Hours later, she was silenced forever. John Miller didn't just kill her body. He killed her chance to finally live openly, honestly, and loved. Alan Trent, the defense attorney, rose unsteadily. Objection, Your Honor. This is playing to emotion. The judge fixed him with a cold gaze. Overruled. The jury is entitled to know the victim's state of mind. Rachel stepped back, her eyes never leaving the jurors. This is not just about what John Miller lost control of. It's about what Marissa James never got the chance to have: acceptance, a future, a tomorrow. She returned to her seat slowly, leaving the journal on the evidence table. John Miller, sitting at the defense table, had gone pale. His hands trembled violently, his lips pressed into a tight line. He refused to look at the journal, refused to meet the jury's eyes. His face said what words could not. He had heard her voice one last time, and it had broken through the armor of his anger. The jury sat frozen, their decision no longer just about facts and law, but about the humanity that had been stolen. Through it all, John sat still, staring at the table, his jaw clenched tight. Finally, the time came for John himself to testify. Alan had warned him it was risky, but John insisted. He wanted the jury to hear from him directly. When he took the stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. His voice was hoarse as he began. I never wanted this to happen. I cared about Marissa. I really did. She made me feel alive again. But when she told me the truth, I felt like my whole world collapsed. Like everything I believed about her, about us, wasn't real. He paused, tears welling in his eyes. I wasn't thinking. I lost it. And then she was gone. Alan pressed him gently. Did you intend to kill her, John? No, he said firmly, shaking his head. God, no. I didn't go there planning this. I didn't even know. It just happened. Rachel rose for cross-examination, her gaze sharp as a blade. Mr. Miller, you say you cared about Marissa. You say you loved her. But love does not strangle. Love does not leave bruises. Isn't it true that what you felt wasn't love at all, but shame? And that you chose to silence her forever rather than face your own insecurity? John's eyes flashed with anger, then broke into anguish. You don't understand. People would laugh at me. They'd say I wasn't a real man. I couldn't live with that. Rachel stepped closer. So you couldn't live with your pride being wounded, but Marissa couldn't live at all. That was your choice. The courtroom fell silent. The jury's eyes burned into John, some filled with pity, others with judgment. He slumped back in the chair, defeated. Closing arguments came swift and powerful. Rachel's voice cut through the room. Marissa trusted him with her truth, and he answered with violence. That is not a mistake. That is murder. Alan tried to appeal to compassion. Do not confuse a tragic loss of control with calculated intent. This is manslaughter, not murder. But when the jury filed out to deliberate, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Hours passed. The courtroom remained packed, people whispering, glancing at the doors. Then finally, the jury returned. The foreman stood, the slip of paper trembling slightly in his hand. We, the jury, find the defendant, John Miller, guilty of murder in the second degree. Gasps rippled through the room. John's head dropped into his hands, a muffled sob breaking free. Rachel closed her eyes, a flicker of relief crossing her face. Clara, sitting in the gallery, nodded slowly, as if a promise she'd made to Marissa had finally been kept. The judge's gavel struck. John Miller, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady, as if the world itself were exhaling. For Marissa, justice had spoken. For John, the walls of a prison awaited. And for the town of Fairbanks, the trial left an indelible mark, a reminder that secrets, pride, and prejudice could turn even the promise of love into tragedy. Snow fell lightly over Fairbanks the morning after the verdict, soft flakes drifting down like fragile pieces of forgiveness the town wasn't sure it could accept. The courthouse was quiet now, its echoes empty after the storm of testimony and judgment that had filled it. But in the homes and hearts of those who had known Marissa James, the weight of her absence was heavier than any snowfall. Detective Clara Hayes stood outside the cabin where it had all begun. It had been cleared of evidence now, but the scent of cedar still lingered, faint beneath the sharp bite of winter air. She pressed her gloved hand against the wooden doorframe, remembering the first time she stepped inside. Marissa's body on the floor, the fire dying in the hearth. Even after decades on the job, some scenes carved themselves into her soul, and this was one of them. She whispered softly, as though Marissa might still hear her. They found him guilty. You got your justice. But justice never felt whole when a life was already gone. Clara knew that. Everyone in law enforcement knew that. The law could punish, but it couldn't bring back warmth to a cold cabin or laughter to a town that mourned. Back in town, a small memorial had sprung up outside Marissa's favorite coffee shop. Candles lined the sidewalk, their flames flickering stubbornly against the cold. A photograph of Marissa, smiling gently in the summer sun, leaned against a bouquet of lilies. Notes were taped to the wall. You deserved better. Rest in peace, sweet friend. We see you now. In the weeks that followed the trial, Fairbanks became a town in quiet reckoning. The memorial outside the coffee shop grew larger, not smaller. Flowers replaced daily, candles relit every evening. But it wasn't just neighbors anymore. Members of the LGBTQ community from Anchorage and even farther north began arriving, leaving flags, handwritten notes, and scarves with rainbow stripes tied around the lampposts. One evening, a young woman with a rainbow pin on her coat stood by the memorial, her voice breaking as she addressed the small crowd gathered there. "For people like us," she said, "Marissa's story is too familiar. She lived with fear, she loved with courage, and she was punished for daring to be honest. We can't let her name fade into just another headline." Her words carried through the crisp night air. Some bowed their heads, others nodded solemnly. Even those who had never spoken openly about such issues before now found themselves whispering Marissa's name with reverence. Local newspapers picked up the story, publishing editorials that forced the town to confront uncomfortable questions. One headline read, "Fairbanks after Marissa. Can we learn to see each other?" In church sermons and classroom discussions, people debated what it meant to truly accept someone as they are. Detective Clara Hayes attended one vigil quietly, standing in the back with her coat collar pulled high. She wasn't there to be noticed, only to listen. As she watched candle flames dance against the winter wind, she thought of Marissa's journals, her handwriting neat but trembling, filled with hope that the world might finally make room for her. Clara felt a fierce conviction burn in her chest. If her town could change, even a little, then Marissa's life wouldn't be lost in vain. Meanwhile, behind prison walls, word of the vigils reached John Miller. A guard mentioned them offhand, saying the town had turned the woman into a saint. John didn't reply. He sat on his cot, staring at the ceiling, hearing Marissa's voice in his head as if she were still pleading with him. "I just wanted to be loved." In Fairbanks, children walked past the memorial on their way to school, asking their parents who the smiling woman in the photo was. And each time, a story was told, not of her death, but of her life. That she was kind, that she was brave, that she deserved to be remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived. By spring, when the snow began to melt and the streets ran with icy water, the candles outside the coffee shop still burned. The people of Fairbanks carried Marissa's memory with them into a new season, their town forever marked by a truth too powerful to ignore. Love cannot survive where prejudice rules, and silence is its own kind of violence. Mrs. Keating stood among the candles, her frail hands clutching a scarf against her neck. She had come every day since the trial began, and she would likely keep coming long after it ended. She was a good girl, she said softly to anyone who would listen. Kind to everyone. No one deserved what happened to her. The town's grief carried with it a mirror, reflecting its own complicity. People whispered in hushed voices about the truth Marissa had feared to reveal, about the shame John had claimed devoured him. It wasn't just a story of one man's violence. It was a story of the prejudice that still lived in their midst, silent until it struck like an axe. In his prison cell, John Miller sat on the narrow cot, staring at the gray wall. The verdict echoed in his head over and over. Guilty, guilty, guilty. He had replayed the moment 1,000 times. The words Marissa had spoken, the look in her eyes, the feel of her slipping away beneath his hands. Each time he tried to tell himself he hadn't meant it, that he'd lost control, but the truth gnawed deeper. He had chosen rage over love, pride over compassion, and now he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He picked up the stub of a pencil and a crumpled piece of paper the chaplain had given him. For the first time in months, he began to write. The words were uneven, smudged by the tremor in his hand, but they carried what little he had left to give. "I'm sorry, Marissa. Sorry for my weakness. Sorry for my hate. I hope wherever you are, you know I loved you, even if I didn't know how to show it." It was too little, far too late. But in the silence of his cell, it was all he had. Detective Clara returned to her office one evening to find the case file closed and filed away. But she couldn't bring herself to shelve it completely. She left a copy of Marissa's photo pinned above her desk, her gentle smile watching over the stacks of unsolved cases. It wasn't just a reminder of the crime. It was a reminder of why she did the job at all, to give voices back to those silenced too soon. As winter deepened, the town carried on, though never quite the same. For those who had loved Marissa, every snowfall seemed to whisper her name. Every flame in a candle vigil seemed to burn with her memory. And for those who had never known her, the trial left a story etched into the fabric of the community, a story of love, truth, pride, and the fatal cost of prejudice. In the end, John's life sentence was more than a punishment for one man. It was a statement, however small, that Marissa's life mattered, that her truth mattered, that her love, cut short and betrayed, would not be forgotten. And though her cabin stood silent in the woods, snow piled against its roof, inside it still lingered the echo of her laughter, the warmth of her fire, and the fragile dream she had dared to believe in. Clara often thought of that echo. She believed some part of Marissa lived on, not only in the quiet memorials or the whispers of grief, but in the hearts of those who promised to remember her not as a victim, but as a woman who had loved, and who had deserved to be loved in return. Justice had spoken, but love, tragic, broken, and eternal, would be the last word.